Are your existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Polyval by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, Polyval is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
All right, we're back for our featured interview with Tim Chen of DomainTools. Now, a lot of times we like to do these at the beginning, as we've been migrating to a Monday, and what we're always happy to do with somebody is if the schedule doesn't work out perfect for them, we'll pre-record it. That's what we did with Tim, so we're going to roll that for you in a second. Let me just remind you quick, ticket sales are open for the Social Engineering Rhode Island Conference. It's going to be Friday and Saturday, June 15th, 16th in Newport, Rhode Island. If you go to se-ri.org, you can register. And in the meantime, I already told you, you can catch me on Twitter at Catalyst, Paul at Security Weekly. Let us know what you thought of today's program, the programming updates, and what you're about to hear with Tim Chen, because as we promise you, he's going to talk about what it's like to be the non-founding CEO and lead the company through a major pivot. There's a lot of lessons there. But then I asked the question about GDPR and what surprises us about it, and he pointed out a potential unintended consequence that might make it a lot harder for us to do our jobs, but then told us what we can do about it, that collective action that Paul was just talking about. So you're going to love that. So enjoy the interview and the conversation. I know Paul and I loved it. And we'll see you next Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, live streamed on Facebook or YouTube, or you can catch us in your favorite podcast catcher. And we'll see you next week. Be safe. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. As promised, Tim Chen is with us. He's the CEO of DomainTools, and where I would normally give you a bunch of latitudes about how awesome Tim is, I'm going to let Tim do this one himself because he got a great way of explaining it. So, Tim, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Great, Michael and Paul. I really appreciate you guys having me. Yeah, a quick bio on me if it's helpful. I think for the audience out there, what might be interesting is, besides the fact that I'm not the founder of DomainTools, which we'll talk about, is I'm decidedly non-technical. My background is investment banking at an MBA, which makes me the least favorite guy to run a security company, I think. But when I came here, I knew the current owners of the company. They asked me to come run this small data company in Seattle for them, and it was a chance for me to run something for the first time. I had never actually hired, fired, or managed anyone in my life at the time, being a business and corporate development individual contributor in tech companies for 15 years in Silicon Valley. So, to see me today as a CEO of a 75-person enterprise security company is not what I envisioned, or I think they envisioned at the time. It's been a really interesting journey, and I think it proves, if nothing else, that there's other ways to get there, and I think it's an interesting story that I hope your audience will get some value from.
No, I love that. Now, so when DomainTools started, and you said it started about 20 years ago, it wasn't a security company at the time. So tell us a little bit about how DomainTools started, but I want to kind of get to this pivot to a security company, which is part of what changed after you joined. So how did all of this come about?
Sure. If people in the audience are kind of on the forefront and kind of hands-on security researchers and SOC analysts, they may be familiar with DomainTools, but I think our reputation is as the quote-unquote domain name whois company. We've been around for 20 years. And so the company that I joined in 2009 was a small $3 million company with a few thousand members paying $10 a month for some access to whois data with an overlay of advertising revenue. And what we've done in the interim, really listening to our customers over the last 5 years, is pivot the business entirely to an enterprise go-to-market. And today the company finds itself with over 500 enterprise customers worldwide, including over a third of the Fortune 100. 25% of our business is in Europe. We're 75 people. And everything we do is about building enterprise class products and providing data and products for our customers to help them understand who it is that may be attacking them on their networks, and to give them context and map the infrastructure that are owned by those adversaries.
Yeah, and this is Paul, Tim, and it's wonderful to have you on the program today. And what I love is that I think it's kind of a lesson that I've learned in props to you guys, right, at DomainTools, is you had great brand recognition. Being an engineer in this field for just shy of 20 years, I knew about DomainTools. I'm like, oh yeah, I've used them before, had great brand recognition. But then to make that successful pivot into security, I think a lot of us in the audience are like, oh, well, they had great brand recognition, so it was easy. I'm like, no, it's not. It's still not easy. It helps, certainly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy and things are just going to happen because you have good brand recognition. You have to execute and do a number of things to grow to where you've grown today. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I think the classic model for startups and enterprise broadly, and certainly in security and enterprise, is you take a couple folks that maybe worked for a long time on top of a technology, know a lot about, maybe it's firewall for the sake of argument, and they bounce out of Cisco, and they say, we've got a great idea for a next generation firewall. And they've been in the business so long that they know the technology and where it's headed. They know the customers. They go to Silicon Valley or somewhere else. They get funded easily. And you get a few product folks, and then they build a company around that. And they have to learn the go-to-market side and build an enterprise class company, which is extremely hard. We're very different. We had, unfortunately, none of those advantages. As you pointed out, we were a 15-person company. Nobody had any enterprise experience, myself included. Nobody had any security experience, myself included. And yet, we kind of took it on ourselves to try and make this pivot. And we've learned an awful lot of very, very hard lessons. It's extremely difficult and a much different thing to build an enterprise company than it is to have a kind of direct consumer-facing offering. And happy to talk about any of that and the lessons we've learned if it's helpful for your audience.
I'm kind of curious a pivot, right? Like there's a difference between the evolution of the business and a pivot. You executed a wholesale pivot, different revenue model, different focus, different customer base. And as you said, not some of those experiences or backgrounds. I can't imagine it was an easy decision, Tim, but like what were some of the factors that led you guys to look at this differently?
Sure. It's a relatively easy decision if you do the one thing that I think is the most important for any company, really, but certainly enterprise, which is to listen to your customers. This is not something that I take credit for. I didn't come up with a great business plan and analyze the market and say, hey, we have a huge opportunity over here in security enterprise, and I want to take the entire business and change it over here and take a huge risk. What we did was some of the customers that we had, and still to this day in our quote unquote retail level, were security practitioners. We hadn't done a good job of profiling our customer base and know that they actually existed. They were a smaller component, but they were the most vocal ones. They called us literally on the phone and said, hey, I've been a member for years. This data is really helpful for me in some emerging security operational processes. I'd love to have more access to your data, better data, and at scale. Can you help me? And uniquely, we got a few of these calls in the same month about 5 years ago from some very, very large organizations that anyone would love to have as customers. So I think the only thing we really did well was we listened to them. We recognized this was a really interesting opportunity. We didn't go and do some huge analysis or hire some consulting firm to see if this was a good decision. We said, this is really where we need to go. This is a much more interesting and lucrative opportunity for us where we can feel like we come to work every day and make a difference. And that's going to help me build a great company. And so we just kind of followed their lead, listened to our customers, and kept doing that. And here we are today, 5 years later.
That's awesome. Paul and I talk a lot about that listening to your customers, especially when you're trying to develop a product or a series of products to meet their needs. When we prepped, you joked that you've learned a lot over it. What are some of the lessons, or what's the biggest lesson that you've learned in terms of either, and I'm not sure how to ask it, is it who to listen to, or do you look for some sort of a consensus before you build in a feature or look at the roadmap? But as you've made that pivot and listened to people, what are some lessons that you've learned in terms of how you build that?
Sure. On kind of the externally facing side, I think one of the greatest lessons is you have to have a balance between listening to your customers and doing innovation in your own R&D organization. And so if you just listen to your customers, they know a lot. They'll tell you what they need right now or what they've wanted for the last year. That doesn't necessarily tell you where the market's going. And you always have to be looking at where the market's heading, or you're going to be trailing by 6 to 12 months at all times. And that's not a good place to be in enterprise. But of course, you need to meet their needs because there's demand there, and you can put a value on that demand. On the inside, you have to, in our case, build a team that are experts in the space that you want to be in. And as in the example I gave of the Cisco example, you're born with these few folks that kind of really know the industry. We had to acquire that or train that internally. But then you have to build a team and a system where people can really experiment in ways that we think replicate the customer experience inside your company and do innovation on and ideas on where we think the market is headed, how we can apply our own core competencies to the space, to the problem space that we're looking at. And if you combine those two things and balance them well, don't do too much of, hey, we're going to figure it out ourselves and hope the market wants it, and not too much of only listening to the market. That's a great lesson. You've got to find that balance. So that's externally facing. Internally facing, we could spend the whole half an hour on this. So I'll just say that perhaps the two greatest lessons I learned are, one, you have to have the product focus and maintain a product focus. When we were pivoting into enterprise, we were I had a build it team and a sell it team. And that is absolutely the wrong way to think about it, even though we were good at both of those things. We're getting better. We were good at building it and we were learning how to sell it. Everything happens through product in the middle. You have to be product first, build your product organization, have an outstanding product leader and product organization, and drive everything through that organization, supported by the other teams. We're not sales-led. We are a product-led organization. So we had to build that from the inside out. And quite frankly, we're still, in my mind, a very good data company becoming a world-class product company, if I'm honest to myself. Secondly, it's go-to-market. Learning how to go to market in an enterprise capacity is so much different than it was in the previous direct consumer market that we had, direct response, that we had to learn this all ourselves. And one of the things that we wanted to do was defend this brand that you talked about, that Paul talked about, which was very strong as, hey, DomainTools has really good data. This stuff kind of just works and it's cost effective, and replicate that at enterprise. And for what that meant for us was, don't oversell to your customers, sell them stuff you can't do. Don't hammer them with repeated inside sales calls and emails. Try and meet them when they want to be talked to, how they want to be talked to. Make sure you know your product, know their problem space, and be able to and everybody who talks to any of our prospects, they have to be able to explain our solution and how it intersects the customer. Nothing makes me more angry than sitting in a call where I feel like our guys, our people, aren't as good as I want them to be with our customer, and we're wasting their time. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, that really makes me know that we have to retrain them. So we really try hard to have an effective and thoughtful go-to-market to try and stand out from what I see from my perspective as some fairly poor and overly aggressive marketing and sales tactics and security in the enterprise.
I think there's a lot of people right now nodding their heads, and I can tell you from my perspective, and Paul and I have talked about it, working with your entire team has been a delight. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is, like Paul and I, we enjoy our conversations when we get to talk to somebody about how their solution works, right? So like looking at Iris, one of your flagship products and other stuff, but also we get that chance to like say, okay, so what does it look like? Like if we do this with you and people get excited, then what happens? And I was so impressed when your team was like, well, we don't really do anything at first. We make sure there's a lot of information that they like. We look at who's interacting with it. If they've got a question, we're responsive. We want to educate. I was like, okay, this is great. Where did you guys figure this out? Because it's the experience a lot of us want, and that I think sometimes is a bit of a struggle. So it's kind of interesting. So in that, how much do you find yourself looking at both what potential people are looking at for what you can provide, the problems that you can help them solve, versus listening to your current customer base? How often do you find then that on the product side that you're responding to needs versus are you able to yet start anticipating what people want and get them fired up about new problems you can help them solve?
Yeah, that's the real balance. I mean, obviously, we want if our customers have a current problem they want help solving, that's what they need right then. And our number one job, of course, is to try and help them solve that to the extent that we can with our products and our solutions, or point them in the directions of other things that can. And I think part of the good go-to-market is being honest if you can't help them. And our team is trained to say, listen, what we have isn't going to help you solve this in the right way, or in a way that's valuable to you for the prices that we charge. Here's a recommendation on what might be more helpful, and here's how we can help you in the future if you head in this direction. So that's part of what we try and do. But I think the balance is meeting that need that they have as best you can, but also in the limited time that you have with your customers, because it's so valuable. You have to appreciate every time a person who is a prospect is willing to get on the phone with you. That time is gold. Take the time, if it's even 5 minutes, to talk about what are your other challenges. what other solutions are you looking at? What would you like it that our solutions did that it doesn't do today? And if we can get one or two things from every prospect call that we have in a given week or month at DomainTools and bring that back to this innovation team that we have internally, that's what helps us see around the corners and start building products now that we think our customers are going to need 6, 12, 24 months from now. And that's a concerted effort. Here's an example of that. Our data has historically used ex post facto. People have an indicator of compromise or a breach. It involves domain names or IP addresses or websites, and they want context on those. They want to figure out who it is and what else do they own or control so I can block it all at the edge of my network. Now I figure out how much of an issue I have here. And our data is very valuable for that kind of investigation, as probably a lot of your audience knows. The products that we're working on now with most of our resources, in addition to the Iris product that you mentioned that you've seen, Michael, is our threat profile, which is our domain risk scoring product, which is using, and I hate to use this term, but we've been doing machine learning for almost 24 months internally at DomainTools without talking about it. And we have a team of data scientists here because we have so much data. And our initial problem we're trying to solve is predicting that domains are going to be used for malicious purposes as soon as they get registered. That's a really valuable problem to solve that not necessarily we were being asked specifically, but we know if we can do this, it can maybe be another effective unique blacklist feed that people can pump in to wherever they're doing enforcement on their network, or they can use it to inform any indicators they see on their own network if there's intersection with domains that we think are going to be bad, and do it ahead of time and get to this predictive layer of security instead of just being in the responsive layer we've been historically. So that's a great example of trying to balance meeting the current need with a product like Iris and thinking about potentially what could be more valuable in the future.
Tim, I'm really impressed with your security knowledge.
Yeah.
And I guess my question, after that compliment is, you didn't have a background in security. You had to build a team, and you've got an awesome solutions in the market. You can communicate that to the market very well, as you just exemplified. But how did you build that team? Like, what was the secret of success to building that talented team that clearly has done a great job of educating you about all the things we talk about in security? But how did you build that team?
Yeah, in a different way that I think traditional enterprise teams are built. I'm not sure if this is the right model, but it's a model that's worked for us. The traditional model, I think, is if you're funded, your investors help in your own industry context, help you go out and find proven people, 20-year VP of sales from some company, you bring them in to drive your sales organization, so on and so forth. And that makes a lot of sense for companies that want to grow fast, take less risk. Right. What we did was we curated a very deliberate interview process where we were looking for the DNA of people that could buy in to the mission of the company and come to work every day, in part because we're doing something that really makes a difference. As our CTO likes to say, we don't make money by selling ads. And I think you get a right kind of person who's going to come to work for more than their paycheck and more than some equity payout in some day because they believe in the mission. Secondly, we hire people with something to prove. And if you can hire for, let's say, an executive role, a rising senior director who has been very successful and wants to take the next step, they will come to work with something to prove every day. Not like, hey, I've done this for 20 years, I know what I'm doing, and have to deal with that kind of ego. But this is a great opportunity for me. I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can and work as a team and prove that I deserve to have a VP title or to run a team of this size. And they're going to continue to work like that. And as we grow, we continue to give them opportunities. That particular attention to the people that we hire and the culture that we've built and trying to hire people with something to prove, I think has allowed us a little more inexpensively to build a fantastic team that drives the culture that Michael talked about and that works together cohesively, and that's been a big part of our success. So that's been our model and it's worked for us.
I want to go back to something you said earlier that's along these lines that, so my experience is when I go visit trade shows in security and I walk up to random vendors' booths and I just start asking questions about what problem do you solve? How is your solution deployed? What's your customer success stories look like? And the DomainTools early on would answer all those questions swimmingly. And the entire process, as you've said, you've built a culture that everyone's able to communicate those things in the light in the culture that you've built, right? How do you do that? Because there's so many other vendors that I visit that I'm like, wow, that was just not a good answer at all. So how do you make sure that all of your people are on board with your culture? I think that's one of the more challenging things to deal with as a leader, as a CEO of a company.
Yep. You have to live it every day, and you have to drive it and communicate it every day. As a CEO, you have to be in the office with your team. I do not believe in being the CEOs on planes all the time, only talking to customers, as valuable as that is, only talking to press, only talking to industry analysts. I guess when you get bigger, maybe you have to do that. But I'm very much an in-the-office CEO. I want to make sure that my team is operating the way that I'd like them to operate. I want to see all of my employees. I want them to see me coming in early, working hard, caring about our customers, making time for a call, making time for an employee conversation. I want to see them, and I'd love them to hear this, for example, me talking about our products, being able to talk about our products and our solutions successfully and why it's so important. And I think if you can live that as a CEO, and you can demonstrate that by being in the office with your team, we have an open office environment here. Nobody has an office, including me. I think that it really helps drive communication and drive trust. And those two things are incredibly important in building a cohesive culture that will allow success. Be it an enterprise or any other kind of business, you have to have communication and trust. And it starts there. And the second thing, obviously, is training. And I'd say we're not great at this yet. I appreciate the words. I'm glad that we came across well. I just think maybe we're better than a lot of other companies that are not very good at it, if I'm being honest. So we're still trying to invest more and more often in better training across the organization, and not just our go-to-market teams, sales, marketing, our customer success team, but our engineers and our HR team and our finance team. There's a demand that I have that they really understand our product and can talk about it, because they're going to be in front of potentially investors or recruiting in front of potential employees. They need to be able to talk about our products and our solutions and why they have value as well. So it's really across the organization. Training is really important and consistent.
Tim, this is impressive. And as you mentioned, and I mean that fully as a compliment, I'm really impressed by everything that I'm hearing. You started by saying you were an individual contributor for a number of years. This is your first CEO position. You've built up to 75 people, and everything you're saying is like, wow, this is a model. You might dispute that, and I'd appreciate that. But how did you make that jump from individual contributor to team leader and grow the team to 75 people? Because a lot of the folks on the other side listening to this are in a similar position. They were individual contributors, and the next thing you know, hey, congratulations, you're the security leader, and you've got a team. All right, good luck. Don't screw up. So yep. What have you learned that might help them navigate through this?
If there's been any success, I think where it comes from is having empathy for the situation of your employees and your company. I've been an employee at large and small companies that have been very successful and have also failed. And so having experienced that journey as an employee, I think you have an idea. And when I stepped into the CEO mantle, I was 40. So I wasn't like a 24-year-old CEO. I had an idea of what I wanted this company to be and what I wanted to be like to come to work every day. And that's just based on experience. So I think, that's part of it. Okay. A second part is being humble and coming to work every day as a servant leader. I'm just a firm believer in that thesis. And then you study. I reached out to other friends. I'm very fortunate that I have a number of colleagues from business school and otherwise who've been somewhat successful in their careers. And I asked them, what was it like at this stage? You've been a CEO for X number of years. How did you handle these things? And really reaching out to almost an advisory committee of other people. You can't do it on your own. You have to get input, because you don't really know if you're any good or if you're terrible on your own. You have to have people tell you you're good at this, you're terrible at this, and that helps you be better. And so I definitely leaned on that as well.
I love that. That's really exciting. All right, so and I want to point something out, and then I'm going to pivot to a different question. Right, my version of a pivot. When you explained the problem that you don't solve, you did something really important. And Paul and I just talked about this morning. It's that when we ask that question, I'm equally comfortable if you tell me the problems you don't solve, or tell me the people that you partner with, and you're instinctively doing that, or you're thoughtfully doing that. But I just wanted to point out, if in case anybody glossed over that, a company that's willing to say, hey, we do X, and what you're trying to do is Y, we're not a good fit for that. Let's talk about who might be a good fit or how we can help you get there. And when you have these symptoms or you see this, we're a good fit for you. Like that's impressive, and I just wanted to point that out. So we've talked about all the data. We've talked about bringing in real data science and doing real machine learning, and not just using it as buzzwords and figuring all type of stuff out. We also know GDPR is on the horizon, and you've got an interesting insight on this, and it's the first time I've heard it. So how is that? What do we need to think about with GDPR when it comes to stuff like who is data?
It's a significant issue, and one that people need to pay attention to. I think for most of the world, GDPR is just a regulation they have to adjust their internal operations to, and it's kind of a compliance issue and a pain in the ass, and they have to hire some people, and they're just going to take care of it. For us and for our customers who use who is data, to the extent that it's the personal data fields, which is the registrant name their email address, phone number, and their street address in the workflows that they do, that data is at risk with GDPR for some subset of DNS. And for us as a company, we've known this is coming. We've been adjusting our product portfolio, and we can talk about that another time. But for our customers, part of what we're trying to do is to teach them different ways to understand who it is behind this domain or IP address or internet infrastructure, and what else they own or control, because the two most fundamental things that people do with our products in different ways outside of using those data fields. And so the GDPR, as it intersects our products, some of the data that we use in our products will not be provided by registrars after May 25th of 2018, and we're adjusting the usability of those products for that. But for our customers, who they may or people that may not be DomainTools customers, but they're using Whois data to inform security processes that are important to the workflows inside their SOC, they need to be very aware that this is coming. And despite our efforts, and despite the press's efforts to do all kinds of alarmist stories, there's still a lot of people that aren't aware that this is coming, and they have to understand, what is my life going to be like if I can't get anywhere email address on this domain name, not from DomainTools, not from ICANN, not from the Whois webpage at GoDaddy, nowhere. How is that going to affect my ability to do my job? We can help people and talk them through that, because we've been thinking about this and working on this with our products for a very long time. But it's something that I want the security community to be very aware of, and to inform themselves of, and importantly, to become engaged. This entire story around how GDPR intersects Whois has not been fully written. There's an awful lot of debate going on between ICANN, the European DPAs, and one thing that we have managed to do successfully, and DomainTools is very involved in these discussions and debates, is we've been able to make security the #1 issue. 6 months ago, it was much farther down the queue. They were worried about other things. We've been able to say, hey, if you do this, if this is the impact of GDPR on Whois, it's going to have this incredible impact on security practitioners' ability to discover and shut down networks of malicious behavior. And ultimately, this data is used in the algorithms that sit behind spam filters and browser and web filters, and it affects the security at a very tangible layer of almost everybody that uses the internet. That's not really overreaching. You can make that argument fairly easily. And so we're trying to evangelize that with the European DPAs, with the US government, and try and make sure that we can land this plane somewhere where there's still some data that can allow our customers and the security practitioners worldwide to do the jobs that they're used to doing. And what we really need is those security practitioners to become involved in the debate at ICANN, if they are large companies, involve their policy and lobbying teams to make sure that this issue gets the recognition and the consideration that it deserves.
So, Tim, is it fair to say that because you're as articulate about this as you've been, that if somebody were to go visit at DomainTools.com, they can get some of this insight or some of this information, or they can test out what Paul and I are verifying in terms of a very comfortable, easy approach to talking with DomainTools? Is there something there who somebody now says, "Whoa, hold on, that's a different angle"? Do we have something for them to take a look at?
Yeah, we haven't done a great job of that. So I appreciate that you've called us out for it, because I'm going to look over here at my director of marketing working on this together right now. Yeah, we've been communicating with our customers. In fact, tomorrow I'm filming a short video to our customers about this issue. So I think we've done a decent job of trying to be very proactive, well ahead of May 25th, that this is coming in a series of emails and communications to our customers. What we need to do a better job, I think, is having a destination on our website to talk to the community about it, because we've done so much work out in the market. There's so much content that we have, so much information. We should do a better job of posting that, so people who aren't customers of DomainTools and haven't been fed some information as customers can still come to our site and learn about it. So I'm going to take that as a good kick in the pants for us to be better at that, and expect that you'll find something there in the very near future. There is some content there, but it's not as good as it needs to be.
I find it very interesting on this topic that we talk about privacy in our on our shows and in our community, in the security community all the time. And like when the pendulum swings towards extreme privacy, I don't know that a number of people in our community are pointing out like the ramifications of that. And it swings the other way and there is no privacy, we get really worked up about it. But when we do have privacy, this is a really interesting, maybe somewhat unique instance where a level of privacy is having a negative impact on security. And usually it's the other way around.
Yep. Yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think you have to be delicate about this because as an individual internet user and as a company, we care about the privacy of individuals. There's real reason why GDPR was written. So we're not averse to the GDPR. We're averse to the interpretation of it against who is.
Yeah.
And in the spectrum of security and privacy, and this is going to be this is an emerging debate that's going to get louder and louder over the next, I don't think, few years. We're definitely on the side of security matters. And you can't have perfect privacy and expect to have security at the same time. You have to make a choice. And so if you're only arguing on a moral compass saying privacy is what matters, puts privacy first and privacy at the top of the pyramid of needs, you're going to end up in a very insecure situation. And if you just look at anonymized networks, and so I'm thinking about Tor, I'm thinking about Bitcoin, for example, a lot of badness accrues to networks that are purely and exclusively and enforceably anonymous. They also have good uses, but a lot of badness accrues to those, and we don't want DNS to end up in the same place. The entire purpose of Who is to make domain owners contactable, because you have in my mind, a responsibility to the internet community. If you say, I'm going to acquire a domain name and provision it in DNS and allow communications to it and send communications from it, be it browsing to a website or email or whatever it is, there's a responsibility to be a good actor in this global trust-based network that we call the internet. And if you're not going to do that, and there's an awful lot of people not doing that, as we all know, in security, then there has to be a way to make those individuals or organizations accountable. Who is so important in that process that any work to impair Who is availability to security practitioners is going to impair security for all of us. That's something worth fighting for. I believe in privacy, but we're going to fight hard to make sure that we can continue to do what we do with this data set to the best extent possible, and provide other methods to do the same thing with other data sets if this gets impaired, beyond repair.
Yeah, and Tim, you brought up great points, obviously, and I don't necessarily. I think it's more anonymization when I think of Bitcoin and when I think of Tor. And it does tie into privacy, of course, but as a security practitioner, and I'm like, well, that's just anonymization, but it does speak to privacy, and I think we could have similar things happen with Who is data that again would breed the underground. I mean, Tor and Bitcoin essentially gave birth to what we term in marketing as the deep web today. And I think that some of the privacy things we're talking about with respect to GDPR could further that underground and scary things that happen.
Yeah, it allows people to do bad things on the internet more easily and with less accountability. It just does. If you're going to redact, if you can't figure out who owns a domain name,
right,
and all you have is the data was registered and the registrar, and it's using these name servers, if you even have that data, that's a pretty scary proposition. I think people will be reasonable about this. The problem is policy takes a long time, and it's a real pain in the butt. And we're trying to work through it as fast as we can. But I hope it lands somewhere that provides a good balance, and we're working as hard as we can to help that process at DomainTools.
Absolutely love it. So Tim, as you look at coming on board 9 years, successful markers along the way, successfully leading a pivot, now taking a broader look at where all this goes, what's next for DomainTools?
We want to have a bigger impact faster, not because we're empire builders, because we're clearly not. But when you feel like you've had some success and you do some things well, you want to build on that and provide that benefit in a broader scale. We tend to sell, for example, to the more sophisticated end of the market because they have the resources and the knowledge to get value from what we can provide. We're looking at ways to drive value down into the middle market, because you can just touch more people that still care about security, where security still matters. So that's important to us. And we're also know we can't touch everyone with a small sales team. And so how do we sell indirect and reach more people in different geographies faster is important to us. But I think the more fundamental answer to your question, Michael, is how can we work with other people in the industry to create more unified solutions and more effective solutions faster? We're an unfunded, self-funding, profitable 70-person enterprise threat intelligence company. There are a lot of other very good companies on top of very useful data sets that are good at some parts of what you need to be good at as a company to grow. But all of us are trying to do this as small enterprises. And I think if there's a way that we can work together, you solve a couple problems. One, the more data that you have, the more insights you can get from that data. And that's part of what we're working on as a company. So data really matters, and having access and control of that data and be able to use it at scale and have the expertise to use it. Secondly, it's value for your customers. They don't want to write 50 contracts with 50 different vendors to be able to provide security across their global enterprise. So if you can get together and provide that through one person, one contract, one, if it's an API or data relationship, that makes everything easier, probably cheaper and safer for your customer. And those are all things that we want to drive for them. And it gives them more time to focus on doing their job instead of talking to people like us. And then on just putting my operator's hat on, you provide more products and more value. You can leverage a go-to-market team. You can leverage a machine learning R&D team across more data. There's efficiencies in just operating the business. At the end of the day, we all go out of business if we can't run the business profitably. And so you can actually do more at scale and more efficiently. So in my mind, there's a way that we can work together, some of us in the industry, to try and provision a broader solution that will benefit our customers and the employees and the shareholders, which are the three constituencies that you care about if you're a CEO.
Awesome. Michael, more questions for Tim?
No, I think it's been great. Tim, I really appreciate it. It's, you and I chatted beforehand, and you pointed to our Startup Security Weekly heritage and said, well, I'm not sure we're really a startup. And that's part of the reason we switched over to the business side of it. And I think listening to this, we've given people insights on leadership. We've given them something to think about with GDPR. It's not hype. That's not all the stuff that's distinguishable. And we've learned how you've grown this company successfully. And I'll just say this. This interview has helped me understand why every one of the interactions with DomainTools has been as good as it is. I mean, that definitely stems from you. And I think so there's a lot here, and I really appreciate your candor and coming on and sharing that with us. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person sometime and having more conversations like this. This has been great.
I really appreciate it, Michael and Paul. It's an honor to be on the show here and to give us a chance to tell our story. Anyone who comes to, we're in Seattle. We love to have visitors. If you're ever here for any reason, please look us up, or if we intersect at the same security show. And if anyone wants to contact me, I'm just tim@domaintools.com. I have no problem giving you my email address. We're always happy to share anything that helps other people out there be successful at what they do. We don't see competitors. We see other companies trying to help the world be safer. We want to support that and be a good corporate citizen. So we're very happy to share anything that can help someone else run a great security company.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, really appreciate you coming on the program. It's another fantastic interview in the books for us here. Thanks for listening. And if you've got questions for Tim, he gave you his email address, but you can also let us know, and we're happy to follow up with them. Let us know what you're learning, what you're thinking of everything, and hopefully you feel more empowered to think about GDPR differently and perhaps to act if you see the importance of moving in that particular direction as well. Thanks. Have a great week.